Hello and welcome back to Timeless Truths. Today, my topic is fallen humanities, why universities are losing humanities majors, and what we can do about it. Even for those who work outside of academia, it probably comes as no surprise to hear that humanities departments nationwide have been shrinking at an unprecedented rate. According to a popular New Yorker article published in February of 2023, Nathan Heller examines what he calls the end of the English major. The statistics he reveals are staggering. From 2012 to the start of the pandemic, the number of English majors on campus at Arizona State University fell from 953 to 578. From 2012 to 2020, the number of graduated humanities majors at Ohio State's main campus fell by 46%. Tufts lost nearly 50% of its humanities majors, and Boston University lost 42. Notre Dame ended up with half as many as it started with, while SUNY Albany lost almost three-quarters. Vassar and Bates, standard-bearing liberal arts colleges, saw their numbers of humanities majors fall by nearly half. In 2018, the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point briefly considered eliminating 13 majors, including English, history, and philosophy, for want of pupils. During the past decade, the study of English and history at the collegiate level has fallen by a full third. Humanities enrollment in the United States has declined overall by 17%, Townsend found. What is going on? The question Heller asks is the same one that humanities professors worldwide have been asking for the last 20 years at least. It is also the question I wish to address in this post. For Americans outside of academia, the answer to the question above is so obvious that it's almost not worth asking. What do you mean, why are there fewer English majors? Where have you been for the last 30 years or so? Luhmann's severed floor? We are in the digital age. What need is there for antiquated degrees like literature? The problem itself is perhaps a bit too obvious. Why are academics wondering about the decline in humanities in an age where scholars and authors are fighting tooth and nail just to make sure we still have books? What need for the literary scholar when literature itself seems to be going the way of the pager? It's like a farmer in the middle of the Industrial Revolution wondering why no one else is learning to use a hand plow like he did. Whether we realize it or not, the year 2000 quietly inaugurated the second economic revolution. We are living now not just in an industrial, but a digital age. Print media has been largely replaced by digital visual media. Even in those situations that called for a utilitarian understanding of reading and writing, textbooks and papers for a college class, memos and reports for a corporate job, print is being replaced. Instructional videos instead of textbooks, voice messages instead of memos, video surveys instead of reports. To add to this problem, since the introduction of the commercial use of AI, many corporate workers generate reports by talking into their phone for roughly 5 minutes, and ChatGPT does the rest. A handful of years ago, I watched a lecture on the Inklings, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Owen Barfield, and Charles Williams, by a professor from Pasadena. He mentioned almost tangentially that in about 50 years he believed reading would occupy the same cultural space as gardening, a hobby practiced only by an elite few that had the time and interest. Those are the usual suspects, the typical reasons given for the problem. Visual media has replaced text and lexical media. Most decent jobs require digital skills such as coding, video editing, or website design. And artificial intelligence has replaced the literary scholar or poet. The idea that digital literacy has replaced textual literacy is once again borne out in the numbers. In the Litverse piece from April of 2023, Blaise Lucy responds to Heller's article by examining the other side of the coin. If students are not majoring in the humanities or liberal arts, then where exactly are they going? He writes, "It is this assumption that the study of novels must necessarily offer a solution to a problem and not just a process with its own rewards that has effectively ended the English major. Blame Gen Z. Just like previous generations of college students, they want to make a difference. This time around, though, paying tens of thousands of dollars to be taught how to interpret books is seen as a hobby with no attributable outcome, not a career. College investment must produce capital, and careers are where one finds that capital. Capital is power, and power propels purpose. In this new understanding of humanities, passion is privilege, and numbers are the truth. As Heller notes, one of the most popular classes at Harvard is now introductory statistics. Enrollment rose from 90 students in 2005 to 700 plus today. If my math is correct, that marks a 678% increase. Wow, what a graph. The English major is dead. Long live statistics, which cannot err. Were I someone who operated in a vocational field outside of academia, this is all I would need to hear. Yes, we are living in a digital age. There is no economic incentive to becoming a humanities scholar or to major in English language or history. Who would enter into an already glutted market which is providing nothing but diminishing returns? If humanities was a stock, I would advise, do not buy. But that having been said, I am reminded of the words of one of the greatest cultural philosophers of our age, Joss Whedon. In his highly underrated and short-lived series Dollhouse, Whedon conceives of a company that allows you to hire people whose minds have been implanted with artificial personalities that are able to do whatever you want them to. Despite not lasting a long while, the show featured one of my favorite scenes in television history. In one of the first episodes, a new doll, just hired by the company, is being put through her orientation and initial training. Part of this involves a cardio test where she runs on a treadmill. As she is undergoing this test, Topher, Fran Kranz, the engineer who created much of the implanting technology, is asked how the various personalities are created, specifically why the psychological personality of their current doll includes a past traumatic event, child molestation by a pedophile. Topher looks at the character on the treadmill and gives the following speech. I'm just paraphrasing here because I just remember it. I'm doing it from memory. When you see a person running, the most important question is this: are they running to something or away from something? The answer, of course, is both. That's how we build our personalities. Echo, a doll who has been given the personality of a child hostage negotiator, has the personality of someone whose greatest desire is to protect children from abuse because she herself was abused as a child. That motivation propelled her to excel in her field. I use this illustration to make the following point. We all practice the same values that Topher articulates in this speech. Whenever we make important decisions, say our career choice for example, we are both running to and running away from something. So, yes, college students are fleeing the humanities and running to STEM because they are running towards economic and domestic stability. They are running towards relevance in the digital age. But that is only half the story. The rise in digital technology and visual media is one reason why humanities is dying. However, it is not the only reason. In this post, I will argue that one of the primary reasons why humanities is losing majors, losing funding, and losing faculty is because it has made itself irrelevant through an exclusive focus on modern critical theory, ideological pedagogies, and the jettisoning of the classical languages and the Western canon. In other words, undergraduates are smarter than what we give them credit for. They are not just puppies chasing the shiny new toy of Twitch streaming or social media influencing. Rather, they are more like the rats fleeing the proverbial sinking ship. Unlike Lucy, I do not blame Gen Z, but the boomers. The killer is in the house. Humanities has not been murdered by Elon Musk, it has committed suicide, and we are just now finding the body. Very quickly, for those of you unfamiliar with the concept of critical theory, what I am referring to is the system of social thought that has become the driving mechanism for most of the contemporary scholarship in humanities programs. This includes ideological frameworks such as Marxism, gender theory, critical race theory, structuralism, deconstruction, queer theory, eco-criticism, and post-humanism. Before going any further, I feel that I should give one very important caveat. I do not think modern critical theory is evil or destructive in and of itself, and I do not think it should be removed completely from the study of literature. There are many instances that, if used correctly, critical theory can open up a range of productive and effective analytical readings. However, I do believe that it has, in a majority of cases, been used improperly to promote false readings and interpretation in ways that are corrupt and destructive to the very fabric of our educational institutions. I hope to articulate these distinctions more fully later in the post, but I want to make sure that readers were aware at the outset. This is not an attack on criticism itself, but on the way that it has been applied in the last quarter century at least. One of the most damaging results of an exclusive focus on critical theory is that it divides English departments along ideological lines. Imagine for a moment that there is a small state college in the center of a more rural area. This college has only 6 or 7 English faculty. If you examine their faculty profiles, their research interests are so predictable as to be almost comic. The one non-white faculty member will specialize in critical race theory. The 1 or 2 female faculty members will specialize in feminism or gender theory. The 2 heterosexual white men filled with elitist guilt will focus on Marxism. And the faculty member who specializes in queer theory just happens to be, well, you get the idea. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yes, I can see how they are all different, but isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't you have distinct views? Doesn't that make debate more engaging? Yes, but what we have in this example is not different views, since all modern theory operates on the basis of cultural Marxism. It sees society as divided between oppressor and oppressed classes, and the only difference between the different theoretical frameworks is who occupies each category. White versus non-white for racial theory, men versus women for gender theory, rich versus poor for the Marxist, etc. The real problem in this example is not the theories themselves, but the literature which accompanies them. The critical race theorist would never have read Milton, the Marxist would never have read Mallory, the gender theorist would never have read Dickens, Shakespeare, Chaucer, Spencer, Byron, Defoe, and the syllabus for the queer theorist starts with Oscar Wilde and then jumps to Tennessee Williams. This is not a united department. It is a pastiche of views and texts, a veritable Frankenstein's monster of literary appendages. And, for those of you who never read Shelley, it does not end well. As Christ reminds us, no city or house divided against itself will stand. If such is the case for a family or even a nation, what is the end of an academic discipline that has become so fragmented? The second most damaging result of an exclusive focus on critical theory is the prioritization of secondary readings or scholarship over primary readings or the literature. In other words, the syllabus for many contemporary English courses, particularly at the graduate level, may feature more philosophers than poets, more critics than cantos, more Nietzsche than novels. Those of you who are paying attention may have seen this coming. If the focus is on critical theories, then the theories themselves become the primary texts of the course. This leads us to a rather bizarre situation in many undergraduate courses. You could very easily, for example, take a course in medieval literature today in which most of the material in the course is from the 20th century. You read not works from the medieval period, but modernist commentary and scholarship on those works. Essentially, the English department has flipped the placement of literature and criticism in the syllabus. If you ever wonder why a Harvard graduate can make it through 4 years of liberal arts education without ever having read Shakespeare, now you know. As publications such as First Things has pointed out, there is a great irony here. In their desire to dismantle the classical canon of literature, universities have inadvertently created and codified a new canon, one not of authors, but of theorists. If you ever have the chance to be present at an interview for a teaching candidate at a college, listen to the names that are brought up in conversation. You will not hear questions about Shakespeare, Chaucer, Milton, Spencer, Dickens, Browning, Eliot, or Joyce. Rather, more often than not, you will hear questions about Foucault, Nietzsche, Derrida, Lacan, Butler, Strauss, Freud, or Kierkegaard. And with all due respect to my friends in philosophy, this ain't your party. Which is why this move is so damaging. I chose to major in English literature because I love English literature. I knew it would not make me millions, but it was just too darn fun. We have completely lost that enjoyment in the modern literature department. People who love language and poetry love to read Shakespeare. You know who they don't love to read? Foucault. God save me from the graduate student in literature who can only talk passionately about theorists, who thinks Shakespeare is nothing but a patriarchal oppressor unworthy of their time, whose favorite book is the reimagining of the Iliad, in which Achilles and Patroclus are both lesbians. In other words, the literature majors who neither love nor respect literature. I hated the theoretical focus of some of my graduate courses. Hated it so much that I wanted to drop out of the program entirely. I am sure there are thousands of others like me who went into literature purely for the love of the subject, but then abandoned ship when they discovered that they were actually in a philosophy or a political science department in literature's clothing. But the main problem with an exclusive focus on critical theory is that it corrupts the very act of literary interpretation by prioritizing ideological narrative over illumination. Originally, the role of the literature professor was to provide analytical tools for students so that they could discover the author's meaning hidden deep within a difficult text. Whatever the text, the central question was always the same. What does the author want us to learn? What idea or truth about reality or the human experience is the author attempting to communicate through this narrative? As John Bunyan asks in the preface to his Pilgrim's Progress, what if my gold be wrapped up in ore? For decades, the scholar of literature understood his job to be helping others dig deep in the mine, to scrape off the ore and help reveal the gold beneath. But in the last 70 years, the goal of the literature scholar has shifted dramatically. Now, the purpose is not illumination, but indoctrination. The reason why literature courses focus so much on critical theory and theorists is because many professors, and the university writ large, wish to control both the ideological values and the critical thought processes of their students. Humanities departments are almost entirely given to secular progressivism. The problem with older authors is that they, for the most part, skew much more towards the traditional in the values they promote. So, in order to keep their students from becoming corrupted by traditional values, literature professors refract classical authors through the prism of contemporary theorists. In other words, these courses are not open explorations of compelling texts, but indoctrination of certain ideological narratives. Many times, the literature itself exists only to provide a vehicle through which such ideological grooming takes place. And that is destroying the discipline. For most of these courses, the ideology is the same. If you are from an underprivileged class, you should be angry at the privileged class. If you are from a privileged class, you should feel guilty about being born at all. Harold Bloom referred to this as the school of resentment, a system of thought based on the hatred of whichever is perceived to be the oppressed group. I, along with other conservatives, like to call it the victimhood Olympics. So let me ask you this. Why are we surprised that people are fleeing this discipline? The work of the literature classroom has ceased to be the exploration of truth, goodness, or beauty in any serious way. Instead, it has become the seedbed of division, anger, and resentment based on perceived privileges. Add to that a list of nearly incomprehensible critical readings, and the question becomes not, why do so few people choose to study this subject, but why would anyone? If humanities programs wish to survive, and even thrive, then they must make some very definite changes. The first of which is this: choose to acknowledge authorial intent exists, that it matters, and that it should be a guiding principle for textual interpretation. In a certain sense, The primary goal of modern theory has been to remove authorial intent from consideration. The argument from scholars has been that authorial intent restricts interpretation to the values of the age in which a text was produced. To this concern, my response is, and? If you call yourself an interpreter of literature, then you are restricted to the values the author is promoting. Now, you may not agree with those values, which could lead to very compelling classroom discussions, by the way, but you cannot change them and still call yourself an honest scholar. If you want to articulate contemporary philosophy, then join the philosophy department. Here, we do literature. Moreover, undergraduates are not stupid. If they see that we are negating authorial intent in order to promote our own interpretive values, if we are leaning full tilt into a reader-response approach, then they will learn the obvious lesson. If any interpretation is just as valid as any other, then why do I need you, the professor? Why do I need this class? Why can't I just read on my own and make up my own mind? Far from making courses more engaging, the removal of authorial intent or any strict standard of interpretation has made literature a discipline both boring and tedious. Why spend any time here? Are you sitting down? Good. The second thing literature programs must do to survive is reintegrate and codify the classical canon. Let me make this simple. If I ran a psychology department, I would understand that an essential introductory course would need to cover Freud, Lacan, and Jung. If I ran a philosophy department, I would understand that an essential introductory course would need to cover Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. If I ran a theology department, I would understand that an essential introductory course would need to cover St. Paul, Augustine, and Aquinas. You and I live and teach in the West. The works that we read are founded on the tradition of the Greeks, Romans, Western Europe, Ireland, and Britain. This means that if we teach essential introductory survey courses, we read Homer, Virgil, the Anglo-Saxons, the chivalric literature of the 12th century, Malory, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Pope, Milton, Wordsworth, Browning, Defoe, Fielding, Austen, Bronte, George Eliot, Dickens, Hardy, Wilde. We do not read these authors because we love white Europeans, or even because we think they are necessarily the best. We read them because they are foundational to the discipline. They are the first. They are the pioneers. All others stand on their shoulders. By all means expand the canon, but save such expansion for upper-level majors or graduate students. Do not dismiss essentials for the beginner. No other discipline would do such a thing. It would simply not make sense. Let me make this point another way. One of the criticisms often leveled at literature programs is that they are a glorified reading club, no different than a group of educated suburbanites that might meet once a week to talk about the latest bestseller. What makes the literature department unique was its focus on the classics. If we remove traditional readings as well as traditional texts, then we deserve the label of a glorified reading club. It is the canon that makes us unique, makes us scholars rather than just readers. This is what we must protect if we wish to retain our unique social position. Let me add one more point. These authors are largely theistic Christians. I don't care if you hate Christianity. You are not teaching you are teaching them. It's perfectly okay if you want to rail against the Victorian Anglicanism of Tennyson. You don't have to agree with him, but you cannot ignore him. This leads me to my last point. If we want to revivify literature departments in America, England, and Europe, then we must change not only what we teach, but why. In other words, to keep ourselves vibrant and valuable, we must return to a vision that sees literature as useful for the purposes of moral didacticism as well as aesthetic beauty. Since the ancient days, literature was understood to be the spoonful of sugar that helped the medicine go down. It presented moral ideals in such a way as to be compelling and desirable. One of my favorite novels from the 19th century, The Heir of Redcliffe, was said to make morality interesting. That is the job of the author and the scholar, to teach virtue by way of example, and to conduct this teaching through the creation of virtuous characters whom we desire to emulate. In his Of Education, John Milton stated it this way: "The end of learning by the study of classical texts is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright, and out of that knowledge to love him, to imitate him, and to be like him, as we may the nearest by possessing our souls of true virtue, which, being united to the heavenly grace of faith, makes up the highest perfection." The truth is this: people are compelled by what they believe to have unique value. If we divorce our field of study from the historical and cultural roots that gives it its unique significance, then students are only right to see no value in it. People will only listen to you if they feel they can learn something from you. If you tell a generation of students that you know no more than they do, and that any reading has just as much legitimacy as another, then they will stop listening to you. Finally, people are compelled by what is challenging. If the texts we present in class are one step up from young adult fiction, then we make ourselves uninteresting and irrelevant. We can only revive our discipline by returning to the values and materials that made it great in the first place. And that is my truth for today.